I'm not going to demand any apology from anybody. What I am demanding is the return of assets.
From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
Tout le monde nous disait que c'était impossible. Everyone said it was impossible. Mais ils ne connaissaient pas la France. They didn't know France.
Now in its 8th year, the Boko Haram crisis in northeastern Nigeria has resulted to the forced displacement of over 2 million people, acute food insecurity, as well as serious violation of human rights, which has largely been denied by the Nigerian government. On this episode of Global Arena, we're turning our attention to the humanitarian crisis in Nigeria's northeast and other matters arising. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. Thanks for joining us. In 2017, out of some 8.5 million people in need of dear life-saving aid, humanitarian partners have targeted 6.9 million women, children and men who are particularly at risk.
I think it's been a neglected crisis, a forgotten crisis, and we want that to stop. We want to get this the attention that it deserves. This is as bad as the other horrendous famines and crises, South Sudan, Somalia and Yemen. This is one of the top 4 crises in the world.
However, some refugees don't seem to have felt the direct impact of the millions of dollars of foreign aid.
For the 2 years I have been here, there was never enough food. We have to go out of the camps to beg. When we do that, we are sent away because we are suspected of planting suicide bombs attacks.
Taken note of the gaps and what more the government needs to do. And because the government, it is a priority security-wise, and we've been very successful.
This is the MSF hospital in Ngala in Borno State in Nigeria. It's inside a camp for internally displaced people. People have come here because they've been fleeing violence and conflict. They've been fleeing violence perpetrated by Boko Haram, but also due to military operations that's ongoing around this area. People continue to arrive as there's still a lot of insecurity in the area. People live here in this camp where they need humanitarian assistance to survive. They need water, shelter and food and healthcare. The MSF teams inside the hospital here are providing a 24-hour service with hospitalization, outpatient consultations, treatment for malnutrition for children and also a maternity service.
We're joined now by a former Nigerian ambassador to Ethiopia who sheds more light on humanitarian crisis in northeastern Nigeria. Ambassador Olusegun Akinsanya, thank you for joining us again on Global Arena.
Thank you, Nifemi, and thanks to Galaxy for inviting me.
All right, so the United Nations and other foreign donor agencies have tripled their commitment from $300 million in 2016 to over $1 billion this year. And the feeling among some is that it shows a better quality of international commitment to ending the suffering in northeastern Nigeria. But for the internally displaced persons, they're asking for more. According to them, they want to see tangible results in terms of better access to basic needs. In your opinion, how much of help have we gotten in the past 8 years of fighting Boko Haram?
Well, thank you for that very topical and very important question. In the last couple of years, we have seen increase in the number of IDPs, internally displaced persons, aside from refugees. That's another element. But we've had well over 2.1 million people that are displaced, that have no source of livelihood, that have to be in IDP camps or in community centers. And we have seen a lot of improvement in changing that superstructure in Nigeria, both at the national level, at the state level, at the local government level, and even in terms of the private sector and the civil society organizations. Dangote Foundation and a lot of other foundations. Government has put up a relief foundation effort to complement what the international community is doing.
Now, let us talk about that for a while. When we talk about complementing, many are also have started asking the questions of the capacity of Nigeria to handle our own problems, because much of the help is coming from outside. Is it that Nigeria is not truly rich and independent enough to address this challenge?
No, that is not the case, Nifemi. We need to be very realistic. Worldwide, there has been a growth of humanitarian crisis worldwide. Well over 12 million people are displaced. I was part of the African Union's common humanitarian policy, the Common African Policy on Humanitarian Engagement, that led to the Istanbul Conference, the first World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul in 2016. I attended the meeting, and I was part of the AU high-level committee that formulated a common African policy towards having a humanitarian architecture that has gone with the growth of of refugees and IDPs worldwide, and this has been on the increase. And it requires not only, I did mention that the state has the primacy, and along with that primacy is the capacity to be able to respond promptly and in a sustainable manner.
There's the question of whether the Nigerian government has taken this foreign aid for granted. In 2016, for instance, President Muhammadu Buhari disagreed with the United Nations and other private humanitarian groups. According to him, he said they are deliberately hyping the level of crisis for financial gains. It was reacting to the position of the UN Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator Peter Lumbeck, who said a projected 5.1 million people will face serious food shortages as the conflict and risk of explosion.
Precisely, I mean, precisely what we're saying. The growth has increased. In terms of effectiveness, before, United Nations organizations like the UNHCR, United Nations Organization for Humanitarian for Refugees, then OCHA, Office of the Secretary General on Humanitarian Affairs, UNICEF, and other UN agencies have been very much involved in the context of what they call humanitarian diplomacy. But there is a sort of donor fatigue. The paucity of that interventions, the frustration of those organizations that what are being channeled are not getting to the right sources. And there are quite a lot of others. I mean, the 0.7% target for ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, are not coming through. And this explains why both the governments and the UN agencies are saying that there has to be ownership.
That's right.
And that strikes the chord of what we are saying. What is being done at the local level,
Let's discuss the body language of government, because the Vice President made mention that corruption plays a pivotal role in the IDPs, for instance, not getting what is being sent to them.
And some are being diverted.
The SGF recently was also indicted for diverting funds, spending millions of naira to cut grass and all of that. Would you say that we've seen the appropriate body language from the federal government? Nothing has been spoken about that particular issue for a while now.
Well, I mean, that is neither here nor there, Nifemi, and I want us to focus on the issue of the humanitarian engagement, the response, and the sustainability. Because of the magnitude of the problem, because of the need for this IDPs to get back their livelihood, it's affecting the economy. Where are the farmers? What are these people, doing before? They are grazing their lands, they are into a lot of farming and so on. They have been displaced.
Ambassador, the reason why this is very important is that Donald Trump, for instance, is planning to cut foreign aid, and U.S. being one of the chief donors for the UN, it's going to affect how much money comes to Nigeria.
Precisely, and to other places.
And to other places. But the question is, what are we supposed to do as a country if we are not providing the bulk of the help? And then it appears that the help coming up from outside is also going to dwindle in a matter of time.
Well, humanitarian engagements is one bit of government engagements and interventions. There are development issues. There are providing for, there have been quite a lot of talk about bailouts. And we have 36 states. That's the issue around to what extent are state governments and local government meeting the needs of their people. There are quite a lot of unfinished products. But this is an issue that touches on the livelihood of people. Humanitarian engagements, humanitarian responses, it's not going to be a one-off. But the issue is that bringing these people back to their livelihood, the issue of sanitation, issue of food security, it's all embracing. And it's not just giving them bailouts. And for them, most of them want to go back to their livelihood to be able to contribute to the economy. But that is a long order.
So we've seen a lot of help from the UN, we've heard from World Bank, the WHO.
And the private sector.
Earlier in the year, the United Nations delegation visited Niger, Chad, Cameroon, and Nigeria. According to them, they were shocked by the scale of devastation and humanitarian need. They promised to help more, but they're also asking the regional government to take more responsibility. That brings us to the question of how much help Nigeria has gotten from Africa, where it has played the big brother role for some years now.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's the delegation that came. I'm sure you are referring to both the peace and security, United Nations Security Council delegation, and also the delegation from the AU, peace and security. They have come, it's usual routine visits to assess the peace and security situation in certain countries, particularly with the advent of the multi-task force, which was started by Nigeria and the African Union, that neighboring countries like Cameroon, Chad, even Benin, Niger, have to be very much involved in curbing the onslaught of the touts, and particularly the Boko Haram, and that worked. But of course, when you have the multi-force, just like the peace support operations, there are issues. There are issues of the command and control. There are issues of funding. There are issues of manpower. There are issues of really cohesiveness. But the AU has been on top of this in terms of putting together this multinational force. And Nigeria still plays a very vital role in the command. But we know the role that Idris Deby of Chad has played, and recently there have been rumors about certain withdrawals. But that is Africa. In terms of individual support, I'm not sure whether that is forthcoming. But at the continental level, there's what is called within the African Union, African Solidarity Initiative. We did it in the case of South Sudan. Providing support, manpower, teachers in the schools. And recently, Nigeria, in spite of our own problems, we still met the humanitarian disaster in Sierra Leone recently, in which we moved items through NEMA. The National Emergency Agency has been very forthcoming. You see, if you followed the issue of response to disasters in Nigeria before, it's little, thin, or nothing. We respond immediately. Maybe Air Force comes in to move people. When NEMA started, it was pointed, but now NEMA has grown in terms of capacity, in terms of funding, even in terms of assistance to other African countries to provide that link.
That's what I'm saying, that
immediate response.
We seem to be doing quite well providing help for other African countries, but we've not been quite impressive in what we do back at home. Does that also call for a review just like the Minister of Finance said recently, that Nigeria is opting out of 90 international organizations because of how much money we're spending. According to our $70 million annual commitment, and currently Nigeria is owing about $200 million. If we're not receiving so much help from Africa, should we also review the amount of help?
No, don't you see, help in various forms. We need to break this down a bit and unpack what we have said, because it's loaded, Nifemi. Nigeria cannot afford to hold on, not giving assistance to other countries. It's our environment. And there is Africa remains the centerpiece of our foreign policy. We have moved from the issue of non-intervention in the affairs of member states into issue of non-indifference. We cannot afford to be indifferent to what happens in other countries. We have measures of it, but whether these countries knows it for us when we seek international appointments is another thing. Yes, many African countries will say that they are going through a lot of problems, but countries like Egypt might be a little bit about South Africa until the ups and downs in our relations. Some countries have been forthcoming. Support is what is required. There is a paucity of resources in many African countries. The expectation could be in terms of kind, in terms of giving support, in terms of supporting us in times of need. I think the expectations have to be guided. I'm not expecting Burkina Faso to send us dollars and all that. We also have really been very careful. The issue that you mentioned about cutting on the international organizations is a question of cost effectiveness and value addition. As the French would say, à quoi servir? What interest are our continuous payments into these organizations? What are we gaining?
To the point of owing $200 million.
What are we good? And they expect us to pay. But when it comes to the dividends, in terms of international post or whatever, even in that organization, you find countries that are not contributing, rubbing shoulders with Nigeria. I think that is the issue. And but there are certain very important organizations that Nigeria cannot pull out of. The AU or the UN, OPEC, we cannot pull out of.
You didn't mention ECOWAS.
And ECOWAS, we cannot pull out of ECOWAS.
The last time we talked about the admission of Morocco to ECOWAS, and since we've seen a lot of a public outcry, especially at the House of Representatives, where a committee has now been appointed to look into that issue. But you and your association met with the Vice President on this matter. What's the feedback from the executive?
Well, I mean, ACAN is the Association of Retired Career Ambassadors of Nigeria, and it's been a long-standing issue that of making overtures to government on issues of interest, issues of welfare. Because the welfare also is very key. I mean, what is being paid to us as retired benefits, and they're also looking at some other things. Our role in the ECOWAS, the fact that we paid a lot to the ECOWAS, and in terms of engagement, in terms of representation in ECOWAS, we are not seeing the right caliber of people representing Nigeria within the ECOWAS Commission. And we host the Secretariat in Abuja. We talked about many other things about funding the foreign ministry. There's no foreign ministry, foreign policy is very serious business. I mean, you need to adequately fund the foreign missions. And we are seeing that recently, the National Assembly made pronouncements on that, both the House of Representatives and the Senate, that our missions need to be funded. Now, coming back to ECOWAS and Morocco, I can only tell you as as an ambassador, a former ambassador, I'm always an ambassador, somebody who has represented Nigeria in several fora, somebody that is exposed to the UN and other agencies, and particularly knowing the formation of the ECOWAS, I can only give my analysis of the situation, that Morocco has no business coming into ECOWAS, both in terms of the geographical nearness, and also what are the narratives, the formatives that have been put forward by the African Union. There are regional economic communities.
Were you able to convince the Vice President to believe that?
No. Well, we made a point. Akan has made a statement on this issue. And many people from the diplomatic environment have spoken on the need to do this. But what I've seen is that where people are looking at the other aspects of it, the economic aspects, which I don't personally believe in. Nigeria has not taken advantage of the ECOWAS market. We have not. It's a market in the background. We have invested a lot. We should do that. We should put our house in order to really do our best to manage a society or a community that we expended a lot of energy and resources to build. Morocco should do the same thing to the Union of Maghrebs.
Let's begin to wrap up by finding out what way forward for the situation in northeast Nigeria. Some are saying that if the foreign organizations have the authority to send aid, they should also exercise that authority in ensuring that what is sent is appropriately utilized. How does that work for an independent country as Nigeria?
Yes. As I said, we must look at the principles of humanitarian diplomacy. The state has the primacy of responsibility for interventions in terms of response and sustainability of the engagement to make it effective. But because of the growth and because of the role of the international community in building a new humanitarian architecture with sufficient funds, with sufficient interventions, with ICT and technicalities, it has become important for them to really add up their engagements. But they are also interested in the deliverables. So when they come to the country, they have to walk through the institutions. There's no way that they cannot do it directly. That is why NEMA was created. And NEMA has been doing quite a bit. It has been doing quite a lot from the beginning. I was part of the government when, I was in government, I was in the foreign ministry, when NEMA was established. And it has really grown in terms of its expansion. And the humanitarian intervention in Nigeria now is at all levels. At the state level, at the local level, there are a lot of IDP camps all over the place. And, we have our own commissioner, humanitarian commissioner, visiting with other agencies going. But of course, the UN cannot do it alone. But their interest is also the deliverables, ensuring that what they are channeling into the coffers for humanitarian purpose are not utilized. And we have heard of the problems of corruption, which is endemic in Nigeria. We have heard about relief items getting to wrong hands. We have seen, issue of even Boko Haram also still making some onslaughts into the camps. So I think what is important is building a capable state and to be able to build the capacity of humanitarian actors.
It's always a privilege having your informed opinion on global arena. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador.
It's my pleasure, Nifemi, and I must say that Galaxy has continued to blaze the trail in terms of bringing to the forum on every Sunday your views by the global arena, the views of others. It's very important. It's the way you are shaping opinion. You are also reaching out to the people. And I want to encourage you to continue.
Thank you very much for your kind words.
It's my pleasure.
That's our show this week. Thanks for being a part of it. You can watch it again on our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Galaxy TV Nigeria. You can also reach us via all other social media platforms. Until I come your way again, I am Nifemi. Oguntoye. Keep supporting a united and prosperous Africa.